Today, let's embark on a unique journey through the fascinating book of Numbers. Prepare to be surprised and deeply moved. Picture the vast, arid expanse of the Sinai Desert, where the wind whispers between the dunes and the relentless sun shows no mercy. There, at the foot of the sacred mountain, the people of Israel gather around Moses, the leader chosen by God. With his gray beard and eyes that reflect the wisdom of ages, Moses stands out in the crowd. "Listen to me, children of Israel," he proclaims, his voice thundering through the desert silence. "The Lord commands us to count all men capable of going to war, from 20 years old and upward, from each tribe of Israel." The divine order is clear, delivered with unquestionable authority. The men of the 12 tribes begin to line up, forming rows that snake through the camp. Each name and number recorded by the scribes represents not just a man but a potential soldier, a defender of God's promise. The tension in the air mixes with anticipation and determination as the people prepare for an epic journey. The sun shines relentlessly as the scribes work tirelessly, meticulously noting every detail. Each man called stands with pride and duty, aware of the crucial role he will play in the imminent crossing. This count is not just a census. It is the prelude to a great divine mission. As the census continues, Moses receives another divine instruction, meant to bring order and purpose to the vast multitude. The tabernacle, a symbol of God's presence among the people, must be at the center of everything. More than a sacred tent, it is the pulsing heart of Israelite life, where prayers rise like incense and the eternal flame burns with the promise of divine protection and guidance. Surrounding the tabernacle, the tribes are arranged precisely, each in its specific place. To the east, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun raise their flags to the wind as banners of faith and courage. To the south, Reuben, Simeon, and Gad form a sturdy defensive line. To the west, Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin symbolize strength, while to the north, Dan and Naphtali protect the camp's flank. Each tribe knows its place and role, a spectacle of divine order that shows the world that God is at the center of their lives. Amid these tribes, the Levites hold a special position, surrounding the tabernacle as guardians of holiness, diligent in their responsibilities. The camp's division and arrangement are not arbitrary. Each detail reflects the celestial order and God's presence among them. As the camp's organization is completed, murmurs and doubts arise. The desert is unforgiving, and the challenges are relentless. Voices of discontent question Moses and Aaron's leadership, and the people's faith is constantly tested. Yet, amid the organization and movement, the Levites' sacred task stands out. These men, chosen by God, have a unique and essential role. They are the guardians of the tabernacle, responsible for every detail of worship and the upkeep of the divine dwelling. Divided into clans, each Levite has specific tasks. The descendants of Kohath care for the most sacred objects, those of Gershon tend to the curtains and coverings, and the sons of Merari are in charge of the wooden structures and bases. Each group knows exactly what to do, and their dedication is a living testimony to their devotion in the desert. For more prayers and notifications, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. This way, you won't miss any inspiring content and can continue to strengthen your faith. The tabernacle stood tall like a beacon of hope and faith. When it was time to move, the Levites carefully dismantled each piece, packing everything with reverence and ensuring nothing was profaned or lost. When they camped again, the tabernacle was reassembled with the same precision and zeal. The significance of this work was immense. The tabernacle was the place where God dwelt among his people, where sacrifices were offered and prayers were heard. Without the Levites, the connection between heaven and earth would be broken. Every movement they made was full of meaning, every task an offering of love and devotion. While the Levites performed their duties with unwavering devotion, the rest of the people began to feel the weight of the desert. Provisions grew scarce, and the monotony of the endless journey began to wear on them. Murmurs and complaints echoed through the tents of the Israelites, who faced the harsh reality of the desert. They began to question their destiny and the leadership of Moses and Aaron. The journey to the Promised Land was far from easy, and the people's faith would be tested. The days in the desert stretched into a long, arduous march, and the dust that surrounded the camp symbolized the doubts and discontent that were accumulating among the Israelites. With each step, the promise of the promised land seemed more distant, and the murmurs grew louder. It was as if the desert tested not only their bodies, but also their souls. "Why did you bring us out of Egypt?" some questioned, their faces marked by exhaustion and discouragement. "At least there we had meat and bread." The voices of discontent rose, carried by the hot wind, echoing through the tents. Despair spread like an invisible plague, threatening to erode the faith that held them together. Moses, feeling the weight of the people's complaints, cried out to God with a heavy heart. "Why have you placed this burden on me?" His words were filled with poignant sincerity. God, hearing his servant's plea, responded in an unexpected way. That night, an unusual sound cut through the desert silence. The rustling of wings filled the air, and a dark shadow covered the camp. Thousands of quails descended upon the people, a surreal sight in the desolate expanse. Initially amazed, the people quickly pounced on the birds, slaughtering them eagerly. But joy turned to calamity when a divine plague struck them while they still chewed the desired meat, reminding everyone of God's power and justice. The lesson was clear: murmuring and lack of faith had consequences. The camp resumed its march with heavy hearts, but a lesson learned. However, the unrest in the desert was far from over. Amid all the tribulations, a new rebellion began to form, a direct challenge to the leadership of Moses and Aaron. The seeds of discord, planted by Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, were about to sprout, promising a new test of the unity and faith of the people of Israel. The cold desert nights brought a disturbing silence, broken only by the whisper of the sands moved by the wind. But in the heart of the camp, another storm was about to form. Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, influential leaders among the Levites and Reubenites, began to question the authority of Moses and Aaron. Their voices, filled with resentment, echoed like muffled thunder in the darkness. "Why do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?" they challenged, gathering followers among the dissatisfied and discontent. The murmur of rebellion grew, fueled by frustration and the desire for power. Korah and his companions, their eyes gleaming with ambition, convinced 250 community leaders to join their cause, turning discontent into open conspiracy. When Moses heard these words, he fell to the ground in deep anguish, seeking divine guidance. He cried out to the Lord and, with unwavering determination, called Korah and his followers to a confrontation before the tabernacle. "Tomorrow the Lord will show who is holy and who he has chosen," declared Moses, his voice booming with the force of prophetic truth. The next morning, under the vast, challenging desert sky, Korah and his men stood with censers in hand, ready for divine judgment. The coals inside the censers glowed intensely, reflecting the palpable tension in the air. The people of Israel, watching from a distance, held their breath, waiting for the outcome of this dramatic confrontation. Suddenly, the ground began to shake. A deafening roar filled the air, and the earth opened up beneath Korah's feet. Dathan, Abiram, and their followers were swallowed alive by the flames of the Lord, disappearing along with the 250 men who offered incense, leaving behind a scent of judgment and a clear warning to all who might doubt. God's power manifested in an unquestionable manner, reaffirming the chosen leadership. As the dust of judgment still hung in the air, a new mission emerged on the horizon. Moses, with a determined look, knew that the journey to the Promised Land was far from over. It was necessary to send spies to Canaan to explore and bring back news about the promise that awaited them. With heavy but resolute hearts, the people of Israel prepared for the next phase of their long and arduous pilgrimage. The revolt had barely settled when Moses received a new divine instruction. The time had come to spy out the Promised Land, Canaan, which stretched like a mirage in the dreams of Israel. With the wisdom accumulated over years of leadership, Moses chose 12 men, one from each tribe, for this crucial mission. These men would be the eyes of Israel, the chosen ones to scout the land that God had promised to their ancestors. Among them were Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh. With Moses' blessing and the people's support, the 12 spies set out. their silhouettes soon disappearing into the vast desert. The spies entered Canaan, a fertile and generous land where vegetation was lush and fruits were abundant. The hills rolled under the blue sky, and the golden fields danced in the wind, a stark contrast to the arid desert they had left behind. They collected samples of the land's fruits, including a cluster of grapes so large that it had to be carried by 2 men. After 40 days of exploration, the spies returned to the camp, bringing the fruits of Canaan as tangible proof of the divine promise. The people gathered around them, eager to hear the reports about the land they hoped to inherit. The excitement was palpable, but it quickly turned to unease as the spies began to speak. "It is a land flowing with milk and honey," they said, and the people's eyes filled with hope. However, the next words cast a dark shadow. "But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large." Mentions of giants and terrifying warriors spread fear among the Israelites, and the spies' voices echoed like thunderous pessimism, shaking the people's confidence in God's promise. Joshua and Caleb, however, stood against the tide of despair. "Do not fear the people of the land," they exclaimed, "for we will overcome them. The Lord is with us." But their words of courage were drowned out by the panic that spread like wildfire. Night fell over the camp, bringing with it an atmosphere thick with fear and uncertainty. Murmurs echoed through the tents, questioning the leadership and the divine promise itself. The people of Israel stood on the brink of a crisis of faith, and God's response to their doubts and fears was about to be revealed in an event that would mark the destiny of a generation. The entire camp was in disarray, tension palpable like a storm ready to burst. The spies' pessimistic words spread like fire, igniting fear and hopelessness among the people. Voices of discontent rose in a chorus of frustration, and God's promises seemed distant and unattainable. Moses and Aaron, faced with growing distrust, tried to rally the people, but the clamor was intense. The night was marked by collective lamentation, the echo of a disillusionment that threatened to engulf the people's faith. Amidst the murmurs, the idea of returning to Egypt began to gain strength, like a shadow stretching over the hope of a new life. God, hearing the people's cries and discouragement, appeared in a thick cloud over the tabernacle. His presence was imposing and full of authority, a reminder of the power upholding the promise. The Lord spoke to Moses, his voice cutting through the despair with firm resolve. "How long will these people treat me with contempt?" God asked, revealing his indignation and frustration with the Israelites' lack of faith. The divine decision was severe and direct. The generation that doubted would not see the promised land. They would wander the desert for 40 years until the last person of that generation had perished. Moses, with a heavy heart, conveyed the message to the people. The reality of a destiny of 40 years in the desert descended upon the Israelites like a crushing weight. The silence that settled was heavy with profound sorrow, a bitter awareness of the consequences of their doubts and disobedience. As the people began to come to terms with the new destiny decreed by God, a new challenge loomed on the horizon. It was time to prepare for an imminent battle against the kings ruling the surrounding lands. The desert would no longer be their only obstacle, and the journey of preparation and survival was about to begin. With Moses' words and divine orders still fresh in their minds, the Israelites readied themselves to face a new series of challenges that would test their faith and determination even further. The desert stretched on like an endless sea of sand and isolation, and the reality of their new fate hung over the camp of Israel like a heavy cloud. The promise of the land of milk and honey seemed like a distant dream, a glimmer of hope overshadowed by the harsh trials that lay ahead. As the people prepared for the long journey, the pain of loss and regret was palpable in every step. In the years that followed, the desert became a stage for tests and trials. Each day dragged on, and the relentless heat of the land punished their bodies and souls. The children born in the wilderness would grow up knowing no other land but this vast, barren expanse, while the older generations who had doubted spent their days under the weight of their choices. New challenges emerged in the form of unexpected battles. When the kings of the neighboring territories learned of the Israelites' march, they prepared to defend their lands. The first of these battles was against King Arad, whose resolve was as firm as the walls of his city. As the Israelites advanced, the fight was fierce and difficult, but divine protection was with them, helping them achieve victory. The heat of conflict and the weight of arms were accompanied by a growing sense of unease. Each victory came at its own cost, and the journey was far from peaceful. With each battle fought and each challenge overcome, new doubts and anxieties began to arise, challenging the faith and resilience of the Israelites. The next major obstacle on their path was the attempt to cross the lands of Edom, a journey fraught with new challenges and unexpected refusals. The Edomites' refusal to allow passage forced the Israelites to take an even more difficult and prolonged route, increasing the tension and suffering with each step. The divine promise seemed to slip further away as the journey became a continuous test of endurance. As the tribes moved and the challenges mounted, the faith of the people of Israel was tested once again. Hope for a new land and a new life remained alive but distant, like a mirage on the horizon. The struggle and suffering in the desert seemed endless, as if the very land were rebelling against the people of Israel. Each hardship felt like a new test of their faith and patience, but as they advanced, a new threat loomed on the horizon. A force that challenged not only their physical endurance but also their moral and spiritual strength. The city of Bashan, ruled by the formidable King Og. He was not just any king but a living legend, a giant whose strength and size were infamous among neighboring nations. His kingdom lay to the northeast of Canaan, and his resistance promised to be one of the fiercest challenges the Israelites would face. Stories of Og and his people were terrifying, tales of giants and impregnable fortresses setting the stage for a battle that seemed a true test of Israel's survival. Yet Moses, faithful to the divine promises, knew that victory was within reach. As the Israelites approached the borders of Bashan, the desert heat mingled with the tension of the impending battle. The battlefield was ready to be marked with the sweat and blood of warriors. The Israelites, with renewed strength and courage, advanced under the command of Moses and Joshua, determined to face the giant before them. The battle against Og and his forces was fierce, and the Israelites fought with the determination of those who had no choice but to win. Each blow and advance echoed through the desert, a symphony of bravery and adversity. As the people of Israel dealt with the aftermath of the battle and the camp reorganized, another crucial issue arose: how to conquer and manage the vast land that lay ahead and still seemed distant. The administration of the new lands and their distribution among the tribes would be a colossal challenge, and preparations for this began to take shape. The preparation for the next stage of the journey was just beginning, and the tension of knowing that new battles and challenges awaited on the horizon added an additional layer of complexity and expectation to the continuous desert crossing. After the victory over King Og of Bashan, the atmosphere in the Israelite camp was charged with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. The conquest of Bashan brought a new sense of achievement and hope to the people, but also revealed an urgent need to plan for the future and organize the vast land that lay ahead. As Moses and Joshua reassessed their strategies, the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh stood out with an unexpected request. They had seen the land of Bashan and the fields surrounding it and were drawn to the idea of settling there instead of continuing to the Promised Land. It was a fertile and productive land, offering abundant pastures and ideal conditions for their livestock. Their request was made with sincerity and desire, but also with underlying concern: the fear of the unknown and doubt about what truly awaited them in the Promised Land. Moses listened to their request with a grave expression, aware that the decision was not merely a matter of territory but of leadership and commitment to the divine promise. The negotiations and debates stretched on for days as Moses and other leaders expressed and discussed their concerns. A delicate balance needed to be struck between ensuring all tribes remained committed to the journey and acknowledging the legitimate desire of some to settle in a land that offered what they needed. Meanwhile, the camp was abuzz with murmurs and discussions, reflecting the complexity of the decisions that needed to be made. The stakes were high, as the future of all interconnected tribes hung in the balance. Maintaining unity and a collective vision for the conquest of the Promised Land was in constant tension with the immediate desires and needs of some tribes. The negotiations over the land distribution and commitment to the divine mission were at a critical juncture. The fate of the tribes and the balance between immediate desires and long-term duties hung in the balance, poised to shape Israel's future. As they prepared to face the final challenges of their journey, the tension between settling down quickly and fulfilling the divine promise grew ever more palpable in the camp. Finally, Moses, with his wisdom and patience honed over years of leadership, struck a deal with the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh. They could stay in the conquered lands, provided they pledged to fight alongside the other tribes until the promised land was secured. As the tribes prepared for their new distribution, the urgency to cross the Jordan River and enter Canaan intensified. Moses knew that crossing the Jordan wouldn't be simple. The river, often turbulent and wild, presented a significant natural barrier. However, a divine plan was in place. The camp buzzed with preparations and anxieties. Joshua, now Moses' successor, received clear instructions from his leader. The strategy was straightforward. God's presence would guide and protect them during the crossing. The tabernacle was made ready for transport, and the priests prepared for the passage ceremony. On the decisive day, the scene was charged with intense emotion. The people of Israel gathered at the Jordan's edge, watching with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. The river's murky, voracious waters seemed like an immense obstacle, a final test of faith before entering the promised land. As the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant approached the water, a divine miracle unfolded. The Jordan's waters began to part, creating a dry path through the riverbed. The people, both awed and fearful, advanced in an orderly line, crossing the Jordan with a growing sense of achievement and hope. The crossing was marked by deep reverence and expectation, but entry into the promised land was far from guaranteed. New challenges and battles awaited as the Israelites prepared to face the fortified cities of Jericho. The future was within sight, but the path to fully realizing the promise was still fraught with trials. The crossing of the Jordan had been a glorious milestone, a tangible manifestation of divine presence and power. Israel found itself in the promised land at last, but the promise of a new life was not yet a reality. The challenge now was to conquer the cities that loomed like imposing fortresses before them, with Jericho being the first and most symbolic. Jericho, with its towering walls and high turrets, was a symbol of the power and resilience of the Canaanite peoples. Its walls, built to withstand invasions, seemed insurmountable. Yet, the Israelites' faith rested in God's promise and the divine strategy Moses had received. God, as always, had a plan. Instead of a conventional attack, the instructions were surprisingly unconventional. The Israelites were to march around the city once a day for 6 days, with the priests blowing ram's horn trumpets. On the 7th day, they were to march around the city 7 times, and at the end of the final lap, the priest would blow a long trumpet blast, and the people were to shout with all their might. The people, though obedient, were fraught with expectation and anxiety. Marching silently around a city that stood as a bastion of despair and fear was a task that demanded patience and faith. The sound of the trumpets resonated in the hot desert air, a prelude to what was to come. The 7th day arrived, and with it, the tension peaked. The trumpets blared, and the people's shouts created a powerful mix of expectation and fear. As the final lap was completed and the final shout echoed through the desert, Jericho's walls began to crumble in an astounding display of divine strength. The seemingly immovable stones fell, revealing a clear path for the Israelites. The victory over Jericho was monumental, but the journey was far from over. Canaan still held many challenges and battles. The next city to face was Ai, a new test of faith and strategy. With the Israelites buoyed by victory and energized by success, the march continued. The future was filled with new hopes and new tests. The next battle at Ai approached, promising new revelations and challenges. The euphoria of victory over Jericho still vibrated in the Israelite camp when a new cloud of concern arose on the horizon. The next challenge was Ai, a smaller city but of crucial strategic importance. Confidence was high after Jericho's colossal walls had fallen, and the expectation was that Ai would be an easy conquest. Joshua, now leading in Moses' stead, sent spies to assess the city. The report they returned was encouraging. Ai seemed less fortified and more vulnerable than they had imagined. Based on this information, Joshua decided to attack with a smaller contingent, believing the city would be quickly taken with a reduced force. The plan was set into motion, and the Israelite army moved forward. The negotiation over the distribution of lands and the commitment to the divine mission was about to reach a crucial point. The destiny of the tribes and the balance between desire and duty were on the brink of a decision that would shape the future of the people of Israel as they prepared to face the final challenges of their journey. The tension between the quest for immediate settlement and the need to fulfill the divine promise continued to grow in the camp. Finally, Moses, with the wisdom and patience accumulated over years of leadership, made an agreement with the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh. They could remain in the conquered land provided they committed to fight alongside the other tribes until the promised land was conquered. As the tribes prepared for their new division, the need to cross the Jordan River and enter the land of Canaan became increasingly urgent. Moses knew that the crossing would not be a simple task. The Jordan River, usually torrential and impetuous, represented a significant natural obstacle, but there was a well-orchestrated divine plan. The camp buzzed with preparations and anxieties. Joshua, now Moses' successor, received clear instructions from his leader. God's presence would guide and protect the people during the crossing. The tabernacle was prepared for transport, and the priests were ready to perform the passage ceremony. When the decisive day arrived, the scene was charged with intense emotion. The people of Israel, gathered at the Jordan's edge, watched with a mix of expectation and fear. The river, with its murky and voracious waters, seemed a massive obstacle ahead, a final test of faith before finally entering the promised land. As the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant approached the water, a divine miracle unfolded. The Jordan's waters began to part, creating a dry path through the riverbed. The people, amazed and fearful, advanced in an organized line, crossing the Jordan with a growing sense of accomplishment and hope. The crossing was performed with a deep sense of reverence and expectation, but entry into the promised land was far from guaranteed. New challenges and battles awaited as the Israelites prepared to face the fortified cities of Jericho. The future was in sight, but the path to complete conquest and fulfillment of the promise was still fraught with trials and final tests. The Jordan crossing had been a glorious milestone, a tangible manifestation of divine presence and power. The people of Israel found themselves finally in the promised land, but the promise of a new life was far from reality. The challenge now was the conquest of cities that stood as imposing fortresses before them, with Jericho being the first and most emblematic. Jericho, with its grand walls and towering structures, symbolized the power and resistance of the peoples inhabiting Canaan. Its walls, erected to withstand invasions, seemed insurmountable. But the Israelites' confidence lay in God's promise and the divine strategy Moses had received. God, as always, had a plan. Instead of a conventional attack, surprising instructions were given. The Israelites were to march around the city once a day for 6 days, with priests blowing ram's horn trumpets. On the 7th day, they were to march around the city 7 times, and at the end of the final lap, the priests were to blow a long trumpet blast, and the people were to shout with all their might. The people, though obedient, were on edge with expectation and anxiety. Marching in silence around a city that loomed as a bastion of despair and fear was a task requiring patience and faith. The sound of the trumpets echoed in the hot desert air, a harbinger of what was to come. The 7th day arrived, and with it, the tension peaked. The sound of the trumpets and the people's shouts were a powerful combination of expectation and fear. As the final lap was completed and the final shout echoed through the desert, Jericho's walls began to crumble in an incredible display of divine power. The stones that seemed so unyielding fell, revealing a clear path for the Israelites. The victory over Jericho was a monumental achievement, but the journey was far from over. The land of Canaan still held many challenges and battles, and the next city to face was Ai, a new test of faith and strategy. With the people of Israel elated by the victory and buoyed by success, the march continued. The future was filled with new hopes and tests, and the next battle at Ai approached with the promise of new revelations and challenges. The euphoria of the victory over Jericho still vibrated in Israel's camp when a new cloud of concern appeared on the horizon. The next challenge was Ai, a smaller city but of crucial strategic importance. Confidence was high after the fall of Jericho's immense walls, and the expectation was that Ai would be an easy conquest. Joshua, now the acting leader after Moses, sent spies to assess the city. The report that returned was encouraging. Ai seemed less protected and more vulnerable than imagined. Based on this information, Joshua decided to attack with a smaller contingent, thinking the city would be quickly taken with a reduced force. The plan was set in motion, and the Israelite army advanced with renewed confidence. However, what seemed a simple conquest turned into a nightmare. The city, contrary to the spies' reports, was well defended and prepared for battle. The men of Ai attacked the Israelites with unexpected ferocity, forcing them to retreat and suffer a humiliating defeat. The defeat at Ai was not just a matter of miscalculated strategy. It was a direct blow to the people's morale and faith. The city became a symbol of an unexpected challenge, a bitter lesson that overconfidence and lack of vigilance could lead to severe consequences. The camp was filled with a climate of discouragement and disappointment as Joshua and the leaders sought to understand what had gone wrong. It was then that God revealed the cause of the defeat. An Israelite had disobeyed divine orders and hidden treasures plundered from Jericho, violating the prohibition against taking items dedicated to destruction. This transgression had provoked God's wrath and resulted in the defeat at Ai. The revelation was a harsh reminder of the importance of obedience and integrity in divine conquests. God's resolution on Achan's sin and the need for purification and justice became the focus of Joshua and the people's attention. The path to victory at Ai and, consequently, to the conquest of the Promised Land was now intertwined with the process of addressing and correcting internal faults. As the process of purification and atonement unfolded, a new phase was being prepared. The reassessment of strategies and preparation for a new attack on Ai was about to begin, promising a crucial turnaround in the fight for the Promised Land. The defeat at Ai had left a painful scar on Israel, but it also brought a fundamental lesson on the need for purity and guidance. After the revelation of Achan's sin, Joshua took measures to purify the camp and restore divine favor. The removal of forbidden items and the execution of necessary punishment were carried out with precision, restoring order and sanctity among the people. With the correction made, Joshua prepared a new strategy for the conquest of Ai. This time, the approach was meticulously planned, and the attack was carried out with military precision. The city was surrounded, and after an intense battle, Ai finally fell into the hands of the Israelites. The victory was not just a territorial conquest, but also a re-establishment of faith and confidence between the people and their leaders. But the journey of conquest was far from over. As Israel advanced, new cities and peoples were still to be faced. The battle for Ai was a crucial step, but the challenge of securing the entire Promised Land continued to require as much strength as cunning. It was in this context of newly acquired victory and preparation for new challenges that the tribes began to reflect on their new reality. The conquest of Ai had opened a path, but the rest of the land was still in dispute, and the organization and division of the lands among the tribes were imminent. While logistical issues and land distribution were discussed, a new complexity arose on the horizon: the unexpected alliance with the Gibeonites. The inhabitants of Gibeon, fearing Israelite strength and imminent conquest, sent envoys to deceive the Israelites. Disguised as travelers from a distant land, the Gibeonites made a peace offer that seemed beneficial but concealed a cunning plan. The discovery of the Gibeonites' true identity and the nature of the alliance involved brought a new strategic challenge for Joshua and his leaders. The need to uphold the alliance and the responsibility to protect those who had deceived them became a new aspect in the complex tapestry of conquest. The focus now was on how to deal with this new political reality while the people of Israel prepared to face more battles and fulfill the divine promises that still lay ahead. With the Promised Land still being conquered and new challenges arising at every step, the path to the full realization of the promise continued to be a journey filled with trials and crucial decisions. After a series of battles that consolidated the conquest of the Promised Land, Israel was at a crucial moment in its history. The victory over the coalition of Canaanite kings and the subsequent division of the lands marked a significant turning point. The people of Israel, finally settled in the Promised Lands, faced the challenge of transforming the conquest into a new prosperous life in accordance with divine will. Joshua, now established as a leader, faced the complex task of ensuring that the tribes were settled fairly and that the land was managed according to God's principles. The land distribution was done carefully, meeting each tribe's needs and characteristics, and organizing the new communities was an essential step for the future. However, the land's conquest was just the beginning. Israel's true mission was to live according to divine laws and promises, maintaining the unity and faith that were fundamental to victory. Continuous obedience to divine orders and constant devotion were essential to ensure that the Promised Land became a truly blessed home. As the people of Israel settled and began to build their new lives, the stories of challenges and conquest continued to inspire and teach. The journey from the desert crossing to the Promised Land's conquest was a testimony of faith, courage, and perseverance. Every decision and victory were important steps in fulfilling a divine promise. And so, with the people of Israel firmly established in the Promised Land, the next chapter of their history was ready to unfold. The lessons learned and experiences lived throughout the journey would be fundamental for the future as they continued to live and thrive in the land God had promised them. If you enjoyed this epic and inspiring journey through the book of Numbers and the conquest of the Promised Land, don't forget to like and share this video. Your help is essential so that more people can learn about and be inspired by these stories of faith and courage. Subscribe to the channel for more content like this and keep following our spiritual journey. Until the next video,